Hi, this is Tim from Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Thanks for tuning in for yet another episode. This one is another follow-up. I did a Whitesnake vinyl episode earlier, and this one isn't going over any new Whitesnake vinyl, but it is going over some new Whitesnake products and some products that are new to me, some things that have been released, mostly albums, but one thing that isn't an album that we'll be talking about at the end here. Been trying to get caught up. I'm somewhat of a completist on my music collections, and I at least like to get all the CDs for most of the bands that I listen to whenever possible. And Whitesnake, there's a lot that I was a little bit slow on, and there's a couple of brand new items that I just picked up. So I'm excited to go over them with you on this edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I keep looking over at my pile. And Whitesnake, of course, if you know anything about them, it's David Coverdale and a list of musicians. So many lineup changes over the years, and so many different sounds as a result of all those changes, so many different approaches to their music. They started off an offshoot of Deep Purple, as they were, bluesy, British R&B based hard rock, gradually got more, I guess you could say, American sounding, more commercial sounding. Then they became what some would refer to as a hair metal band, even though I hate that term. And now they've kind of combined, lately, they combine, I think, elements of all of those things. But I'm going to go over some items that I picked up and additions to my Whitesnake catalog on Tim's Vinyl Confessions. This is Live in the Heart of the City, which I have owned this for years. This was the first quote-unquote old Whitesnake album I picked up after I got into them upon the success of the 1987 album. But this version is the deluxe version on Parlophone EMI. And I didn't know this for quite a few years, but Live in the Heart of the City was originally released as a double album. It's actually comprised of two albums, Live in the Heart of the City, which is recorded in June of 1980, and Live at Hammersmith, which was recorded in November of 1978. So even though we're within 2 years, already there's a difference in the lineup of Whitesnake, and that's just how it is. At the 1980, 3 out of the 6 members of Whitesnake were former Deep Purple members: David Coverdale on vocals himself, Ian Pace on drums, and the late great John Lord on the keyboards. And what's interesting about the deluxe edition is that it adds a couple of Coverdale's Deep Purple era songs into the Whitesnake canon. Might Just Take Your Life and Mistreated, both of which are from the Burn album. So since they appear on a Whitesnake album, they have become part of the Whitesnake catalog. Much more on that Deep Purple connection as this episode continues. So I had the Geffen CD, the reissued Geffen CD. So I now have the deluxe version. There's quite a write-up inside of it, pictures of the group. I really like the versions of the songs on here. Like I said, this was my introduction to the early Whitesnake. The only early Whitesnake song I had heard was in 1987. I had seen the video, the original video for Fool for Your Loving. So I wanted to find the album that was on. So that was Live in the Heart of the City. So it's something I had, and now it's just a different version of it. In the same vein, no pun intended, this is the 25th anniversary of Whitesnake's 1984 album, Slide It In, which was their North American breakthrough album. This is worth picking up, even if you've already got the original. It's a very complicated, and I won't even try to get into the story behind the recording of Slide It In, because it's very complicated. Essentially, the album was recorded twice with 2 different lineups. It was recorded in the UK, and then it was revamped for the US market. The UK version was produced by Martin Birch, who up until that point had produced all of Whitesnake's albums. Of course, he had worked with Deep Purple, and Iron Maiden fans will know he's worked with them for most of their career. But they signed with Geffen Records in the US, and John Kolodner, which is a name some of you will recognize, the A&R guy, said it needs to be remixed. It needs to be Americanized, for lack of a better term. So Eddie Kramer was originally brought in as producer. His work was less than satisfactory, according to David Coverdale, and he was replaced by Keith Olsen, legendary producer. That produced the version that most of us out there originally heard. the 10 songs known in North America as Slide It In. This contains the US remix and some bonus tracks which include most but not all of the songs that appeared on Slide It In. What's interesting, I don't know if you can see that or not, but even though it's the US remix, the songs are in a different order than they originally appeared on the US album. As you can see, the first song is Gambler as opposed to the title song, and it goes from there. Track 11 on disc 1 is a song called Need Your Love So Bad, which is a blues cover that was a B-side of the Give Me More Time single. And I'd never had a version of this before. It's a slow blues. It's essentially Coverdale showcase for him. It's just him and keyboards, very slow blues song. I'm glad to have it on here, and it's got UK mixes. And there's not a huge difference between the US and UK mixes. I will say that I like the sound of the US mix a lot better. It's a lot brighter. The guitars are a little bit louder. The drums are more clear and in your face. It's the late great Cozy Powell appears on this album, and I love the drum sound on this album. It's got some of my all-time favorite Whitesnake songs. Love Ain't No Stranger is one of the best. I don't know, it's not a ballad. It's the best. It's mid-tempo. It's the kind of thing that Whitesnake did very, very well. Obviously the title song, Slow and Easy. Guilty of Love is just a catchy, fun song. Give Me More Time, again. It's a good album. I mean, it's not an album most of you, if you're Whitesnake familiar at all, need much introduction to. But this is worth buying to hear those alternate mixes, the B-side. And disc 2 is DVD. It's got all the promo videos from it, including some. It's also got some Top of the Pops appearances and some other goodies, which I won't spoil for you. This is cool. I like when they do this. These are some single covers that had come out, Slide It In era. I don't know if they're UK or you can see here. This one down here features a 4-piece band, yet there's a 6-piece band in another one. Like I said, very confusing process of this making this album. So there's a booklet inside of it, all kinds of write-ups, all kinds of a little bit of information about the making of the album through David Coverdale himself. So it's Coverdale's point of view on it. Worth picking up. Like I said, I've had the CD for years, and something that I'm kind of mixing it up chronologically, but I think I'm okay by placing it here because it makes sense. This just came out last year. This is Live in '84, Back to the Bone. This is a document of the Slide It In era that isn't the Slide It In album. This is a DVD CD collection, and it's from Super Rock Japan '84. So by this time we had a lineup of David Coverdale, John Sykes on guitar, Neil Murray back on bass, and Cozy Powell on drums, and a guy named, I feel the need to mention this man's name, Richard Bailey. He's an uncredited keyboard player, completely off stage, even though there are moments in the songs, like the beginning of Love Ain't No Stranger, where the band they're not playing anything, but there's keyboards coming up. It actually is a live keyboard player. This has basically the CD and the DVD are the same. There is a bonus gallery on the DVD, the slideshow, and there are some demos from David Coverdale's private archives of him playing early versions of some of these songs. It's interesting because I never think of David Coverdale as a guitar player, but I mean he does play guitar and he writes a lot of the songs. It's interesting because by this time John Sykes had joined the band, and this gets into, we've got a lot of live versions of these songs to talk about. But basically, Whitesnake's sound changed dramatically depending on the players that were in the band, and there were so many. This also documents, by the way, John Lord's final performance with Whitesnake before he rejoined Deep Purple. So he's in some of these clips, but not all of them. It's interesting to note that, of course, when John Lord's in the band, he's not curtained off backstage and not talked about. He's very, very prominent, but that's just kind of the way that the music business is. It makes sense. So there's this, some footage from his final performance. There's lots of cool pictures to go along with this. Mel Galley was another guitar player that passed through Whitesnake, and he has since passed away as well. That's a picture of the 6-piece Whitesnake band as it originally, the Slide It In era, started, but it ended up just being a 4-piece. It's a very cool thing inside here, dedicated to Cozy, John, and Mel. Cozy Powell, Mel Galley, and John Lord, all members of Whitesnake that have since passed on. So this is a cool collection if you're into the slide-it-in era. But back to the live performance. Like I said, I really like the early Whitesnake, although I got on board with what you would call their hair metal period, and that's my favorite. I love the shredding guitar stuff, and I love John Sykes playing. I just don't like the way they do some of these old songs. They do Walking in the Shadow of the Blues on here, and they just, first of all, it's 100 miles an hour. The original version is, just kind of a slow thumping blues song, and when they do it here, it's, in my opinion, way too fast. I mean, most of the songs here come from Slide It In, which was their current album. They were promoting it, and that's understandable, but they do reach back into some of the earlier Whitesnake stuff. And the guitar solos, he's just blistering fast playing all over the place, which is fine if that's the way they originally recorded. But I've always been one of those guys that feel that changing a guitar solo is like changing the lyrics of a song. It just doesn't sit right. There is one very cool thing on here, though. They do Crying in the Rain, which appeared on Saints and Sinners, which came out in 1982, which of course it was re-recorded for the 87 album. But at that time, it was from Saints and Sinners, as was Here I Go Again. Here I Go Again does not appear on here. But the way that they do Crying in the Rain with Sykes is almost exactly the arrangement that's used for the Whitesnake 1987 album. So you're hearing it before the fact. So obviously they'd already changed the arrangement of the song. And in that case, I like how they do that, because it's not unfamiliar. So that's two releases from Whitesnake that document the 1984 Slide It In period. We're going to fast forward a few years to something that it actually came out in 2011, right around the same time as the Forevermore album. But it is time period wise, just by the title, Live at Donington 1990. And if you know anything about Whitesnake's history, you'll know that this was one of the last shows before they disbanded, but it's also when they had Steve Vai in the band. A lot of things that, the success had come, and success with the Whitesnake 1987 album had almost nothing to do with the players on it as far as the tour and the videos were concerned. Very confusing, and again, I'll get to that later, but this is a CD DVD collection of Whitesnake's performance at Donington, which is now called the Download Festival, but for years was a very prominent UK festival. Still is. It's just under a different name. And Whitesnake are no stranger to Donington, having played there back in 1980. Same time Def Leppard was one of their very first gigs, just to give you some historical context. So they actually headlined. They headlined over Aerosmith. That's how big Whitesnake was in 1990. It may sound funny now. And live performance-wise, it's basically everything that's on the CD is on the DVD. I like those customized discs there. It's pretty cool. If you're not a fan of the Steve Vai era of Whitesnake, you will not enjoy it. I'm a Steve Vai fan myself. I'm not a huge fan. I'm not overly familiar with all of his body of solo work, but I love the stuff he did with David Lee Roth, and I like the Slip of the Tongue album. And there are quite a few songs on here from the Slip of the Tongue album. This is the back cover of the booklet that features, as you can see, there's Whitesnake, Aerosmith, Poison, London Choir Boys, and Thunder. So August 18th, 1990. You remember what you were doing August 18th? Were you at this show? And much like by doing the Deep Purple songs on Live in the Heart of the City, they added those to the Whitesnake catalog. By summer of 1990, Steve Vai had released what would be his most successful solo album, Passion and Warfare. And I'm guessing that part of his agreement to join Whitesnake meant that when that album came out, he could do a couple of songs from it in the Whitesnake show, which he does. He does the instrumental, well, they're both instrumentals, For the Love of God and The Audience is Listening. So by virtue of this coming out now, there are two of the Steve Vai songs that are now in the Whitesnake catalog. As far as the songs themselves, I have nothing but admiration for David Coverdale's voice. He's one of my favorite rock singers ever. I do think that of late he's been sounding a little worse for wear, vocal-wise. And I think part of the problem goes back to this tour. because the Slip of the Tongue album, the material on it was recorded in pretty high key, and he's literally screaming. It's kind of no wonder to me if he did a full tour like that. You know, it's a wonder his voice has lasted as well as it has. But anyway, when they do the Slip of the Tongue material, it sounds good, and it sounds right. When they do almost anything else, it doesn't sound right at all, because they overplay everything, and they change the arrangements. Slide It In goes into this half-time slow section in the middle of it, and I just want to hear the song played the way that I'm familiar with it, you know. They didn't ask me. This is just my opinion. A lot of stuff from Slip of the Tongue. So like I said, if you're not a fan of this era, you will not enjoy. But this is an interesting snapshot. I mean, this is pre-grunge, when these bands were at their peak of success. Fast forward a few more years, Whitesnake kind of, or David Coverdale, which is kind of one of the same, they kind of went under the radar for most of the 90s. He did his Coverdale Page album with Jimmy Page, 93, which I actually quite liked. There was, you know, there was supposed to be a full tour. I think they did some Japanese shows, and that was it. And that was the end of that particular collaboration. So they kind of went behind the scenes. In 97, there was an album released called Restless Heart under David Coverdale's Whitesnake, which to this date has never been released in North America. It was originally intended to be a David Coverdale solo album, but his record contract stated that it had to be released as a Whitesnake album, and so it was. And I think there was a tour for that album abroad, but in late 97, this came out. Starkers in Tokyo. Starkers is a very British expression for naked in Tokyo. So basically this is a Whitesnake Unplugged album, and there's two chairs here. One says Mr. Coverdale, one says Mr. Vandenberg. And I was excited to hear this because I'm a huge fan of Adrian Vandenberg. I'm a huge fan of his self-titled band Vandenberg that put 3 excellent albums out in the mid-80s. If you watch my Whitesnake vinyl episode, I've got one of them on vinyl, and this is 10 songs. It's literally the two of them seated in front of what sounds like a very small, intimate crowd, and doing there's a few songs on here from Restless Heart: Too Many Tears, Can't Go On, Don't Fade Away. There's Sailing Ships, Deeper the Love, Love Ain't No Stranger, Give Me All Your Love, Is This Love, Here I Go Again, and Soldier of Fortune, another of David Coverdale's Deep Purple tracks. You can see here it's a picture of Coverdale with dark hair, which is a little bit different hairstyle for him. Didn't keep that long at this point, but this is really, really good. It's really, really good listening. He doesn't try to scream, he just sings in a lower tone, and it just really sounds like you're in the room listening. And that's Starkers in Tokyo. Now I have to say I was a little disappointed because on the first Vandenberg album from 1982, they actually scored a minor hit with a ballad called Burning Heart, one of the, in my opinion, the best power ballads ever. And Whitesnake were going to record this song for Slip of the Tongue, but famously Adrian Vandenberg did not perform on that Slip of the Tongue album. Steve Vai played all the guitar parts, even though Vandenberg co-wrote 9 out of the 10 songs on it. So it made sense for them not to revisit what was his song, basically, on a Whitesnake album, although I would have loved to have heard David Coverdale sing that song. I don't know if there's any demo versions of it. I've never been able to find one. And, of course, there really wasn't a next Whitesnake album until, 8 years later, and they just didn't revisit it. Now, apparently, they did rehearse Burning Heart for the show the concert that made this disc up, but it didn't get recorded, which is a shame. I'd highly recommend checking out those Vandenberg discs. So, again, it was kind of under the radar as far as North America was concerned, but Coverdale reformed Whitesnake in, I think, 2003 under a different band and started touring again. And this album, Live in the Shadow of the Blues, came out in 2006. This is a 2-disc collection. Now, this version I have is actually a Brazilian version on Hellion Records, which is licensed from SPV, which is a UK label. SPV issued the Whitesnake album Good to Be Bad, which came out 2008, which had been the first new Whitesnake album in several years. This has 4 new studio tracks on it: Ready to Rock, If You Want Me, All I Want Is You, and Dog. And this lineup, let's see who was on here. This lineup also recorded, I believe, a DVD called Live in the Still of the Night. I get mixed up. Shadow of the Blues, Heart of the City, Still of the Night. But there was a DVD, and I was quite impressed with it. But I think this might be a different lineup. This is Doug Aldrich, Reb Beach, Uriah Duffy on bass, Timothy Drury on keyboards, Tommy Aldridge returning on drums, and this is a document of that tour, which is, I like the way that they play a lot of these songs, and I love the fact that they went back and they started revisiting some of the pre-slided in Whitesnake songs, like Don't Break My Heart Again, Ready and Willing, Take Me With You. They also do a medley of Burn and Stormbringer from the Deep Purple days. Just a few months ago, I was very, very excited because Whitesnake are a band with such a confusing history that there, and surprisingly enough, for all of their success, there had never been a Whitesnake book. And leave it to a Canadian writer, Martin Popoff, to provide it for us. I've got some of his books, like his Rush, Success Under Pressure, and actually his very first book, Riff Kills Man. And he's a very, very prolific writer about all things hard rock and heavy metal. He has a particular affinity, I believe, for Deep Purple, so it makes sense that he would be the one tackling Whitesnake. So just a few months ago came the release of this, Sail Away, Whitesnake's fantastic voyage. This is the story of Whitesnake, a story that needed to be told. And it's a great read. Fills in a lot of blanks for me. There are interviews here with most of the players that have come through Whitesnake over the years. Several interviews with Coverdale himself, interviews with Bernie Marsden, one of their early guitar players, Neil Murray, some archival interviews with Ian Pace, John Lord, Mickey Moody. Nothing really from John Sykes. John Kolodner from Geffen Records, producer Keith Olsen has some commentary. Steve Vai, Adrian Vandenberg, Vivian Campbell, Rudy Sarzo, Tommy Aldridge. You know, a lot of the players that came through Whitesnake are represented here, and it documents what was a very, very unlikely success story when they hit big with like Still of the Night, Here I Go Again, Is This Love in '87, considering that the band Whitesnake had been around for almost a decade at that point, and yet they had a rebirth as a new band. And the stories behind recording not only Slide It In, but especially the 1987 album, the breakthrough Whitesnake album. So many things happening with members coming and going, and producers getting fired, and record labels wanting different mixes. If you've ever been a fan of the band, if you like Martin Popoff's writing, this is not something to be passed up on. I've read and reread this, and I know I'll reread it again and find something different in it. So I highly recommend this book. It's the first time I ever talked about a book on here besides a tour book. But Whitesnake's Fantastic Voyage, Sail Away from Martin Popoff. Definitely check this out. And now, this leads me to something that has only been out for 2 or 3 weeks now. Earlier this year, David Coverdale started to talk about this project that he's working on as the next Whitesnake album. And it stems back to 2012 when Deep Purple and Whitesnake keyboard player John Lord passed away. David Coverdale basically wanted to make peace with guitarist Ritchie Blackmore, of course from Deep Purple, who has been out of the hard rock scene for many, many years now. He's playing sort of Renaissance style music, although there are a lot of people that would love to have him either back in Deep Purple or in a reformed Rainbow or some point. And Coverdale wanted to know if there was any interest in doing a reunion of Deep Purple Mark III, which was Coverdale, Blackmore, Lord, Glenn Hughes, not Roger Glover, and Ian Pace. This was the lineup that recorded the albums Burn and Stormbringer. Didn't get very far with that, but Coverdale had already started to revisit the songs that he was involved in. And he basically wanted to pay tribute to Deep Purple for giving him his big break. He was basically a semi-professional singer, never recorded in his life, never played in front of big crowds, and at that time, in 1973, Deep Purple were one of the biggest bands in the world, and they gave him a shot, and it set him off on his career. So he wanted to pay back in kind to the band. But one of the reasons that the Mark III reunion got vetoed is that there was one more Deep Purple album that was recorded after Blackmore left in 1975, Come Taste the Band, featured the late Tommy Bolin on guitar. If you're a Motley Crue fan, if you know their song Teaser, that's a Tommy Bolin song. It actually doesn't sound that different from his version of it. And so he wanted to perform material from all three of those albums, and of course he knew Blackmore wouldn't. But he'd already started toying with the idea of if he was going to re-record some of these songs, what would he do with them? And when the Blackmore Purple reunion thing fell through, his wife, I guess, suggested the idea of, well, why don't you record them and release it as a Whitesnake album? So that is the story behind the Purple album, the new Whitesnake album. Like I said, it hasn't been out too long. This is on Frontiers Records, as the last few Whitesnake albums have been. And this features, well, I'll just read the track listing. Burn, You Fool No One, Love Child, Sail Away, The Gypsy, Lady Double Dealer, Mistreated, Holy Man, Might Just Take Your Life, You Keep On Moving, Soldier of Fortune, Lay Down, Stay Down, Stormbringer. I actually have the deluxe edition, which also includes the songs Lady Luck and Coming Home. There's a bonus DVD with some new videos for it, and the e-pack behind the scenes of the making of the Purple album. And this album was recorded with the now current Whitesnake lineup, which now has not Doug Aldrich on guitar, but Joel Hoekstra, fresh from a stint in Night Ranger. Tommy Aldridge on drums, Bruce Coverdale on vocals, and Michael Devon on bass. A long write-up in here from Coverdale himself talking about his history with Deep Purple and the idea behind re-recording these songs. Now, the truth of the matter is that I've always been a bigger fan of Whitesnake than I ever was of Deep Purple. I have a couple of Deep Purple albums, a compilation, and I do have the Burn album. And it's got some good material on it, but I just never fully got on board like I did with Whitesnake. And part of the reason, and a lot of purists will hate me for saying this, but it's just my opinion, the production really dates those the classic Deep Purple albums, even though there are great songs underneath what I would call muddy production, and not as guitar heavy as it maybe should be. The songs were written heavier than they were produced a lot of the times. So the idea of putting a new spin on these songs was very exciting to me, because I mean, Burn is a great song, Stormbringer is a great song. These were great songs that deserved that wider audience, that when they think of Deep Purple they think of Smoke on the Water and Highway Star and Woman from Tokyo and maybe Hush, songs that David Coverdale was not involved in. It's almost a footnote to some that he was a member of Deep Purple. So I really like the fact that he's re-recorded these songs and gave them new life, and not really new arrangements, just vitalized it. This is an excellent production on this album. I love the drum sound on this album. I think it's just pristine. Produced by David Coverdale, Michael McIntyre, and Reb Beach. And I'm not sure who Michael McIntyre is, but I know that Coverdale's worked with him since Whitesnake started recording again with Good to Be Bad and Moving Forward. I'm really glad I got the deluxe edition, not just for the DVD, but for Lady Luck and Coming Home. I think Coming Home might be my favorite of the 15 re-recorded songs on here. It's just great. It's interesting because, like I said, I've been a little bit critical of Coverdale's voice lately in some live clips I've seen that really, they made me cringe. But he sounds good here, and as a document to bring these songs back to life, I think it's very worthwhile and very worth checking out. So, yes, the Purple album. David Coverdale re-recording songs that he was originally involved in. Surprisingly enough, Glenn Hughes does not appear on this. I thought that there would be a guest spot, but perhaps there's some bad blood there. He didn't want to be involved. Who knows? But it's worth checking out. So basically, me catching up on my Whitesnake CD collection, and I just wanted to bring everyone up to speed on the two newest releases, in particular the Purple album and the Martin Popoff book, Sail Away. If you're a fan of Whitesnake, both of those items are definitely worth checking out. Thank you for watching Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Continue to like, comment. I'd love to hear your feedback, and share these episodes, whatever social media you're on. I appreciate all of that. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned. We'll have another episode soon.